Brace yourself, because how far they went to destroy you will leave you trembling. This wasn't petty gossip or harmless jealousy. This was a full-blown execution attempt on your destiny. When they couldn't find evidence, they manufactured lies. When the truth stood tall, they tried to bury it alive. They wanted to strangle your name, erase your identity, and leave you gasping in the ruins of a reputation you never deserved to lose. They weren't just trying to cancel you, they were trying to crucify you. Think about it. Psychology proves false accusations can scar deeper than physical wounds. Because, while a bruise fades, an attack on your name tries to assassinate your soul. And that's exactly what happened. They came after your essence, your calling, your divine identity. Why? Because you dared to shine where their darkness reigned. You embodied integrity, resilience, and favor, and insecure souls couldn't stand the reflection of their own emptiness. So they didn't just break the mirror, they declared war against it. Comment 777 if you know what it feels like to have hell itself orchestrate a smear campaign against you. Because here's the divine twist: what they meant as your burial became your resurrection. To everyone who has supported this channel through super thanks, your love is more than generosity. It is proof that light still stands against the darkness. And I thank you deeply. Stay close, because the revelation ahead will make your heart pound and your spirit roar. It will expose the chilling depths of their sabotage and reveal the glorious setup God has been crafting in the shadows. This is not just a story of survival, it's proof you were chosen for something the enemy could never kill. Let's enter the fire. God's chosen ones. How far they went to destroy you will shock you. They didn't just whisper lies, they staged an entire theater of falsehood, erecting a crime scene around your very existence, as though your breath itself was a threat to their carefully constructed illusions. What crime did you commit? None. Your only offense was radiating a truth that unsettled their darkness, a light that shattered their stage of masks, just as Jesus declared in John 15:25. They hated me without a cause. They hated you without evidence. Isn't it terrifying how envy can twist into conspiracy? And silence can be dressed up as guilt. They couldn't call you dishonest, so they painted you as too private. They couldn't accuse you of arrogance, so they muttered that you were cold. Their words were like shadows stretching across a sacred canvas, distorting what was pure. Think about how Mordecai in the book of Esther stood silent at the gate while Haman burned with rage. Esther 3-5. And yet the very gallows Haman built became his own undoing. Could it be that the traps set for you are nothing but mirrors reflecting back the schemes of your enemies? Their attacks were psychological warfare, not physical battles. Modern psychology confirms that false accusations carve deeper wounds than knives, because they pierce reputation, dignity, and belonging. In Psalms 38:11, David cried, "False witnesses did rise up. They laid to my charge things that I knew not." Your story echoes his lament, doesn't it? They filled in the blanks of your life with fiction, treating your identity like a stage on which they projected their fears. Yet even Michelangelo, when carving David, he said he was merely releasing the figure already hidden in the marble. What if the smear campaigns were chisels that only revealed the masterpiece of who you are? And stories of ordinary people echo this same truth. Maria, a seamstress in a small Spanish town, once told her daughter, They said I was lazy because I was quiet. But silence is not laziness. It is strength gathering its breath. She endured ridicule at work for years, only for her consistency to be the reason she was later chosen to lead her guild. Doesn't that remind us that even in small, hidden places, the same divine pattern unfolds? Great orators like Archbishop Desmond Tutu once warned, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor." And indeed, the crowd that watched your crucifixion by rumor remained neutral, nodding along to the noise, as if Pilate washing his hands absolved him of responsibility. Matthew 27-24. Why do bystanders so easily become accomplices to lies? Why do lazy minds swallow vague accusations as though they were gospel? The lies clashed against truth like dissonant notes in a sacred symphony. Yet, as Beethoven wrote in his Missa Solemnis, "From the heart may it return to the heart. Lies return to the liar, and truth reverberates through eternity." Shakespeare once wrote in Othello, "Who steals my purse steals trash, but he that filches from me my good name robs me of that which does not enrich him, and makes me poor indeed." Isn't that exactly what slander tries to do? Strip honor without gaining any real treasure. And then, as the dust of deception settles, the world begins to see it clearly. You were never the suspect. You were always the target. The intensity of their attacks reveals the intensity of your calling. Their obsession is their confession. Their hatred, the evidence of your divine appointment. Like Joseph, who was betrayed by his brothers and thrown into a pit, Genesis 37-28. You were cast aside only to be elevated. What if the very lies meant to bury you were the soil from which God's chosen purpose for your life would bloom? Rise. Chosen one, let the false stories fall away like cracked plaster from an eternal temple. Stand in the resonance of truth. For the one who called you vindicates you. Your silence has already shouted louder than their noise. It is time to walk forward, not as the accused, but as the anointed, armed not with vengeance, but with victory. This is your moment to rise from their ashes and declare with unwavering faith, no scheme of man, no whisper of hell can destroy what God Himself has established. They didn't come at you with facts. They came at you with feelings ugly, insecure, jealous feelings dressed up in the costume of evidence. What kind of justice is that, when emotion masquerades as truth? In Jeremiah 17-9, it is written, "The heart is deceitful above all things, and desperately wicked. Who can know it?" Their accusations were not the product of reason, but the overflow of hearts corroded by envy. You didn't harm them. Your very presence reminded them of everything they had failed to become. Isn't it chilling to realize that you were never their enemy, but their mirror? Instead of acknowledging their own shortcomings, they went into survival mode. Attack the one whose existence unmasks the lie. Attack the one whose peace feels like a rebuke. And like jackals circling prey, they stalked your light, hoping to devour what they could never produce themselves. Psalm 27-12 echoes your story. "Deliver me not over unto the will of my enemies, for false witnesses are risen up against me, and such as breathe out cruelty." Why would your calm spirit be mistaken for arrogance? Why would your steady silence be twisted into suspicion? Because for the insecure, your stability is their storm. Their projections hardened into obsessions. They whispered vague claims. Something about them feels off, as if shadows could ever serve as evidence. Like clouds moving across the sun, they tried to obscure your brilliance with their passing doubts. But Job himself endured such distortions when even his friends, instead of comforting, accused him, saying, "Is not your wickedness great?" Job 22:5. And yet Job's integrity outlived their accusations, just as yours is outliving the whispers thrown against your name. History too has its villains who lived by projection. Nero, the Roman emperor, burned his own city, yet blamed Christians for the fire, unleashing persecution that scarred the empire. His reign ended not in triumph but in suicide, despised by the very people he sought to control. Doesn't this reveal that false accusations say more about the accuser than the accused? That obsession with your downfall is the loudest confession of their emptiness. Nature testifies to this pattern. The sunflower does not provoke the crow, yet its height irritates the bird that cannot rise to the same stature. The ocean does not plot against the cliffs, yet the cliffs feel themselves breaking under the steady tide. Isn't it true that your quiet growth unsettled them more than open conflict ever could? Crowds joined in the drama, as they always do, intoxicated by gossip more than truth. Matthew 26:59 records that the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death. Lies need no proof, only repetition. And people, lazy in thought but hungry for spectacle, took sides against you without ever demanding receipts. Why does the crowd so easily become an accomplice to slander? Why do so many prefer the noise of accusation to the discipline of discernment? Yet, time is the great equalizer. Emotions decay while truth endures. Like autumn leaves, the fury of their accusations withers, while your roots sink deeper into eternity's soil. Ecclesiastes 3:14 declares, "Whatsoever God doeth, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken from it." Now, as the dust clears, even the most gullible eyes are opening. The question rings across the silence. If you were truly the villain they painted, why has nothing ever stuck? The answer is radiant in its simplicity. They weren't reacting to truth. They were reacting to their own reflection in you. Rise, chosen one. The false stories have expired. The borrowed voices have grown hoarse. But your light still burns. You were never the villain in their fantasy. You were the proof that truth cannot be silenced. Stand now with holy boldness, for no storm of feeling can drown the foundation God has laid within you. What they mistook for weakness was the hidden strength of the anointed, and no whisper of envy can erase what heaven has written in fire. They thought your silence would be their victory, but your survival became their sentence. You didn't need to speak a word, because your endurance itself was the loudest testimony. Isn't it strange how peace can echo louder than protest? In Isaiah 30:15, the Lord says, "In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength." And that very strength turned into a mirror that made them flinch. They expected you to rot in bitterness, yet you grew in grace. And every step forward announced to them that their weapons had failed. Your healing became their haunting. Like a cathedral built on unshakable foundations, your integrity stood tall when the storm came, and their guilt reverberated against its walls like dissonant frequencies that could not break through. Hebrews 10:30 reminds us, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." You didn't need to fight back, because every time you walked with dignity, the architecture of heaven itself amplified the sound of your survival. Doesn't it pierce you with wonder that sometimes restraint becomes the sharpest sword? They expected you to be shattered glass, scattered and sharp, but instead you were molten metal, reforged in fire into something they could not bend. Psychology calls this post-traumatic growth, the paradox where suffering becomes the soil of transformation. Isn't it true that what they meant as poison only became the chemical reaction that purified you, just as Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery, yet later had to face the truth when he said, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." Genesis 50-20. Your very existence turned their betrayal into evidence of divine orchestration. Ordinary people know this same mystery. Elena, a nurse's aide from a small village, once said to her son, "They mocked me for forgiving, but forgiveness made me untouchable." She endured years of slander from jealous co-workers. But when the pandemic struck, she became the one everyone relied on. Doesn't her story prove that surviving without bitterness exposes the weakness of those who can't imagine such strength? Your peace was misread as arrogance, your glow mistaken for pride. Like Paul and Silas singing hymns in prison at midnight, Acts 16:25. Your joy in confinement terrified those who chained you, because it revealed that chains could not reach the soul. How twisted must a spirit be to despise the light of someone who healed instead of hated, and yet that was their downfall, the inability to accept that you refused to remain broken. History has shown us the futility of such obsessions. Cain, consumed by jealousy toward Abel, thought blood would silence the sting of comparison. But Genesis 4:10 records the Lord saying, "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." In the same way, the more they tried to bury you, the louder your life testified against their schemes. Why do the guilty always choke hardest when confronted not by revenge, but by resilience? And when you did not play broken, they panicked. If you had lashed out, they would have branded you unstable. If you had collapsed, they would have declared themselves justified. But you chose silence, growth, and evolution, the one scenario they never accounted for. Romans 8:37 proclaim, "In all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us." Isn't it astonishing that your greatest weapon was not destruction, but restoration? Now they sit in the ruins of their own narrative, watching you bloom in soil they meant to bury you under. It is the paradox of divine physics. The pressure that was supposed to crush you only compressed you into brilliance. They are left gasping on the dust of their own accusations, choking on the guilt they never imagined they'd have to face. Rise now, chosen one. Your quiet survival is not just endurance, it is victory. Your restraint is not weakness, it is mastery. Walk boldly, for the very peace they despised has become your crown, and the very lies they hurled have become stepping stones into your destiny. This is the hour to stand tall, radiant and unashamed, for no power of guilt, no storm of envy can undo what heaven has already sealed. They studied you like investigators circling a crime scene, but every time they thought they had found evidence, all they uncovered was the unshakable architecture of your strength. They shadowed your life like hawks, not out of admiration but out of an obsession that bordered on madness, waiting for a crack to appear, for a single slip that would justify their envy. Isn't it haunting to realize how much energy some people spend watching, not to learn, but to tear down? And yet Jeremiah 17:10 declares, "I, the Lord, search the heart and examine the mind, to reward each person according to their conduct, according to what their deeds deserve." They searched, but they were not God. and their hunt exposed only their own emptiness. Every word you spoke, every silence you carried, every reaction they dissected became another mirror that frustrated them. They expected you to falter, to self-destruct, to reveal some hidden flaw that would confirm their suspicions. Instead, all they witnessed was consistency and quiet resilience, a steady pulse of truth that refused to break rhythm. Doesn't this echo the story of Daniel, who, under constant surveillance by envious officials, was found blameless? So they manufactured laws against prayer just to entrap him. Daniel 6-4-5. How enraging it must be when the strength of integrity outlives the schemes of envy. They weren't studying you to understand you, they were studying you to break you. But how do you dismantle someone whose foundation rests deeper than ego? Psalm 62-6 whispers the answer. He only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be moved. Like a cathedral whose stones are set in eternity, you were too grounded, too anchored in divine purpose, too centered in truth to collapse under human scrutiny. Isn't it fascinating how every attack only reinforced the very structure they wanted to destroy? Instead of admitting their misjudgment, they did what insecure hearts always do when the evidence runs out. Imagination takes over. They began painting you as too perfect, too polished, too composed, as if balance itself were a crime. Michelangelo once said, "Trifles make perfection, and perfection is no trifle." Yet they twisted perfection into suspicion, whispering that your peace was a mask. Doesn't this reveal more about their fear of authenticity than any supposed flaw in you? Literature has captured this dynamic. In The Crucible by Arthur Miller, accusations without evidence spread like wildfire, fueled not by truth, but by envy and projection. Gossip became its own kind of scripture, believed simply because it was repeated. In the same way, your accusers manufactured guilt in places where only grace lived. Isaiah 54-17 had already spoken against them. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. And still they kept digging into your past, your personality, your every decision. But every grave they dug unearthed not skeletons, but survival stories, not weakness, but layers of strength. And this drove them furious, because you were not the fraud they prayed you would be. You were living evidence that discipline, faith, and peace are real. As Nelson Mandela once said, after 27 years in prison, "I never lost hope because I believed in the justice of my cause." His survival condemned the excuses of the oppressors. In the same way, your endurance stripped away their lies, exposing how hollow their own excuses were. Doesn't it unsettle them to see that your authenticity proves their mediocrity is not inevitable but chosen? So they kept watching, kept whispering, kept inventing flaws where none existed. Like Pilate's words in Luke 23-4, "I find no fault in this man." Your life repeated the same verdict. They had no case. Their accusations were echoes in empty chambers, their projections, reflections of their own fears. And as they choke on the noise of their fabrications, you stand as truth they cannot unsee, light they cannot extinguish, and strength they cannot explain away. Rise, chosen one. You were never the suspect. They only studied you to distract from their own corruption. Stand in your strength, because their obsession has already become their confession. And their failure to break you is proof that heaven has already built you for victories yet to come. They did not build a case, they built a circus of chaos. a bonfire of hysteria dressed up as evidence. What began as a single whisper grew into a chorus of condemnation, not because it was true, but because it was convenient. Isn't it terrifying how quickly one complaint can metastasize into a collective lie when envy feeds it? Proverbs 19:5 warns, "A false witness will not go unpunished, and whoever pours out lies will not go free." Yet, in their frenzy, punishment was the last thing on their minds. They were drunk on the power of narrative. And what is more dangerous than a mob intoxicated not by facts, but by feelings? It was not the truth they wanted, it was theater. And they were eager to play every role except honesty. One vague accusation became a wildfire, like dry leaves in autumn catching flame. Every old rumor and forgotten grudge became kindling, ignited by jealousy. They didn't gather facts, they gathered gossip. And gossip spread faster than light in a fractured prism. Does it not echo the fate of Jesus when false witnesses stood before the Sanhedrin, twisting silence into guilt? And the crowd shouted, "Crucify him." Mark 15:13. What they built wasn't justice, it was theater, staged to make insecurity look righteous. But every false stage eventually collapses when the curtain falls, and the actors are forced to stand in the nakedness of their own hypocrisy. The tragedy of their drama is that it was always doomed to be exposed by the light of reality. They took whispers and crowned them as witness statements. One person lied, another repeated, and the third swore they heard it themselves, until fiction wore the costume of truth. Isn't that the danger of groupthink, that when voices echo loudly enough, people stop questioning whether the sound carries substance? Ecclesiastes 5:6 reminds, "Do not let your mouth lead you into sin." Yet their mouths became hammers, forging accusations out of nothing but noise. Their words were not the architecture of justice, but scaffolding of fear, rattling and swaying with every gust of rumor. And in that fragile structure, the collapse was inevitable, because truth has always outlasted the sound of empty hammers striking air. Nature tells this same story. Hyenas, when they cannot defeat a lion head-on, laugh loudly in a pack to intimidate. Their noise, a substitute for strength. In the same way, your enemy's volume was never proof of victory, it was proof of fear. They could not explain your resilience, so they conjured shadows where only light stood. But shadows cannot survive without light, and their very accusations became proof of your brilliance. Just as the dawn silences the cries of nocturnal beasts, your rise exposes how hollow their threats truly were. Doesn't creation itself testify that noise never conquers substance, and fear never conquers truth? History too bears witness through its villains. Consider Robespierre during the French Revolution, once a man of ideals, who turned paranoia into policy. His Committee of Public Safety condemned thousands of whispers and suspicion, but in the end, he met the guillotine by the very hysteria he had unleashed. Does it not reveal that those who build their cases on fear and frenzy eventually fall under the weight of their own inventions? The guillotine became not just his punishment, but his mirror, showing him the sharp edge of his own cruelty. How fitting that those who weaponized lies are so often slain by the blades of their own hysteria. There was no trial, no defense, no weighing of truth, only the noise of insecurity dressed as certainty. Isaías 59:14 declares, "Justice is driven back, and righteousness stands at a distance. Truth has stumbled in the streets. Honesty cannot enter." In their obsession, they made themselves judge. jury, and executioner, condemning you not on what they knew, but on what they felt. Yet feelings have no weight in the courtroom of eternity. Doesn't it strike you as ironic that they claimed authority while standing on foundations of sand, and when the tide of time rushed in, their judgment dissolved like salt in water, leaving only your vindication behind? The most chilling part? People believed it not because it made sense, but because it was delivered with drama and confidence. In a world addicted to narrative, the loudest story often wins, even when it is false. Isn't it disturbing that many preferred the comfort of lies to the challenge of truth? They didn't want the real you. They wanted a version that made their own insecurities feel justified. Yet, Psalm 38 kus promises. He will make your righteousness shine like the dawn, the justice of your cause like the noonday sun. And no matter how loud the lies, the dawn always breaks, scattering shadows into silence. The noise can deceive for a night, but it cannot withstand the sunrise of truth. But the truth is stubborn, like bedrock beneath shifting sand. It resists erosion. John 8:32 says, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." And now, every time you rise, every time you shine, every time you evolve, the cracks in their case widen. They are left choking on the dust of their own accusations, watching as the illusion they crafted disintegrates into nothing but air. Isn't it poetic that the very stage they built for your downfall has become the arena of their exposure, and as they shrink in the ruins of their lies, you stand tall in the fortress of truth, unshaken and unstoppable. Rise, chosen one. Their hysteria has collapsed under the weight of your endurance. What was meant to bury you has only revealed the eternal foundation under your feet. Stand boldly, for your very existence has exposed the fraud of their theater. The noise is fading, the lies are crumbling, and all that remains is the unshakable testimony of your survival. Your survival is not just survival, it is prophecy, declaring that no falsehood can ever erase the blueprint God has written over your life. They did not fear your past, they feared your potential. The true threat was never what you had done, but what you were on the verge of becoming, even before you had grasped the full extent of your calling. They sensed the tremors of it, like early seismic waves hinting at a coming earthquake. Isn't it haunting that people can often detect your future before you can see it yourself? Jeremiah 1-5 declares, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." Your very existence radiated destiny, and that invisible frequency disturbed every structure built on lies and manipulation. They noticed the subtle signs, the way you carried yourself with quiet dignity, the way people were naturally drawn to your presence, the way the very atmosphere shifted when you entered a room. You weren't even trying, yet you altered the resonance like a tuning fork, setting the frequency of the whole chamber. Acts 4:13 tells us that the rulers saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were unlearned and ignorant men. They marveled, and they took knowledge of them, that they had been with Jesus. Isn't it powerful how presence itself can preach louder than words? They panicked because they knew you would outgrow them, outshine them, and by simply standing in truth, you would expose everything false they had built. It was never about your history. Most of them didn't even know where you had come from. They weren't reacting to who you were. They were trembling at the shadow of who you were destined to be. Destiny terrifies those whose empires are built on ego, because destiny carries a weight they cannot replicate. In Isaiah in 49-10. God declares, "My purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please." Can you see why they tried so hard to clip your wings before you learned to fly? It wasn't logic that fueled their accusations, it was desperation. A frantic attempt to hold back the tide of what heaven had already unleashed. Their strategy was cruel but calculated: isolate you, mock you, spread lies about you, paint you as dangerous or unstable. And all of this before you had even discovered your full value. Isn't it telling that they treated you like a threat, even when you were still doubting yourself? This shows how deeply they feared what would happen once you stopped second-guessing your worth. Just as David was dismissed as only a shepherd boy until he brought down Goliath, 1 Samuel 17:33-50. Your humble beginnings were never weakness, they were disguise. They knew that if you ever recognized your strength, their counterfeit thrones would crumble. Ordinary lives testify to this pattern. Raphael, a janitor in a small-town school, once told his daughter, "They laugh now, but one day the same people will need what God put in me." For years, colleagues mocked him for studying engineering textbooks on his lunch break, until eventually he designed a water system that saved their community during a drought. Isn't that proof that people fear what you are becoming? Long before you step into it, they see the seed, and they know it will become a tree too tall for them to shade. Their panic was not rational, it was prophetic. They weren't fighting you. They were fighting time, trying to outrun the inevitable. Revelation 12:4 describes the dragon waiting to devour the child the moment it was born. Because evil has always sought to kill destiny before it matures. Isn't it clear that betrayal felt so personal because it wasn't about your present self at all? It was about the unstoppable future version of you that terrified them. And here's the irony: they weren't wrong. You were a threat, not because you carried malice, but because you carried a mantle. Their fear was confirmation that you were chosen. Their attempts to suffocate you before you bloomed only exposed the truth that you were never meant to blend in. You were meant to disrupt. John 15:16 resounds, "You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last." Their panic was their prophecy, because the very thing they feared is exactly what has come to pass. You are rising into the role heaven prepared for you. Rise, chosen one. They tried to silence you before you could even sing, but your melody is eternal. They tried to stop you before you knew how to run, but your race has already been marked by heaven. Stand in your destiny with boldness, because no fear, nor slander, no betrayal can erase the blueprint God has etched into your soul. Their panic was proof, and your perseverance is victory. They didn't just watch you suffer, they turned your pain into their weapon, your tears into their testimony, your silence into their script. Every moment of breaking was documented in their minds, not to help, but to twist. When you wept, they whispered, "Unstable." When you withdrew to protect your peace, they stamped you as antisocial. When you retreated to pray for strength, they murmured, "Suspicious." Isn't it chilling how those who strike the blow are the first to point at the wound as if it were proof of guilt? Psalm 41:9 reveals this betrayal clearly. Even my close friend, someone I trusted, one who shared my bread, has turned against me. He was that face, whether life, they cut you with lies, isolated you with whispers, suffocated you with gaslighting, and then dared to present your exhaustion as evidence. What they never told was the full story, the countless nights you endured betrayal the trust they shattered, the dignity they trampled. Instead, they took snapshots of your trauma, stripped of context, and framed them as flaws. Doesn't this echo the story of Hannah in 1 Samuel 1:13-16, who poured out her anguish in prayer, only to be accused of drunkenness by Eli? Pain was never proof of weakness, it was the soil of resilience. Your trauma became their propaganda. They stood over your bleeding heart and declared, "See, we told you they were weak." Yet no one asked who held the knife. They preferred to call you broken rather than admit they were the ones who broke you. Isn't it terrifying that scars tell a double story, one of survival and one of cruelty never acknowledged? Job cried in Job 19:19, "All my intimate friends detest me, those I love have turned against me." Your scars became their slogans, but heaven has always read them as survival notes. At your lowest, you were more real than their polished performances. That authenticity unsettled them, because it revealed a truth they couldn't fake. Your strength was born of survival, not of illusion. As the theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer once said, "The person who loves their dream of community will destroy community, but the person who loves those around them will create community." They hated your authenticity because it demanded they face their hypocrisy. Doesn't this explain why your struggle exposed them more than your strength ever could? They needed your silence, your sadness, your hesitation, because it made them feel taller. Your pain was their pedestal. But when you began to heal, when you lifted your head, reclaimed your laughter, and found your voice, they panicked. Just as the resurrection of Lazarus in John 11:43-44 terrified the Pharisees. Your healing destroyed the foundation of their narrative. Because healed you is proof that their lies were never the final word. And even art has captured this truth. In Verdi's Requiem, the Libera Me thunders with desperation before it dissolves into silence, reminding us that even fear-filled voices eventually collapse under the stillness of truth. Your recovery, like that sacred silence, resounds louder than the chaos they once weaponized. Isn't it poetic that what they labeled as instability has now become your crown of endurance? The irony is undeniable. They mistook injury for instability. Yet your scars now testify against them. Isaiah 61:3 promises that God will give a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. What they thought would bury you has only anointed you. And deep down, beneath their gossip and their bravado, they know it. Rise, chosen one. Your healing has already dismantled their lies. Your scars have become scripture, written on your body, chapters of survival no lie can erase. Walk forward with your head lifted high. For you were never the weak one. You were the wounded one who chose to rise. And now your very existence is the verdict. They weaponized your pain, but God weaponized your healing. They could not leave you alone because you were the mirror they dreaded. Their obsession was not admiration, but indictment. Not curiosity, but confession. You lived rent-free in their minds, a tenant they could not evict, because guilt was the landlord collecting interest on every hidden deed. Isn't it striking that silence can torment the guilty louder than any accusation? Proverbs 28:1 declares, "The wicked flee when no one pursues, but the righteous are bold as a lion." They fled from shadows of their own making, yet claimed it was you they were running from. And here's the deeper irony: the more they ran, the more their running proved what they were trying to hide. Flight is not freedom, it is evidence. You didn't chase attention. You didn't post their names. You didn't clap back, and still, they watched your every move with the fixation of a predator who knows it is already trapped. Like owls unable to face daylight, they dissected your silence and exaggerated your missteps. Because peace felt like exposure. Doesn't this echo the words of Luke 8:17? For nothing is hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open. Your elevation was their exposure, and that truth gnawed at their conscience. And here's the haunting part, your very restraint. The fact that you never addressed them became the loudest sermon they could not ignore. It wasn't your accusations that undid them, it was your existence. Their obsession wasn't random, it was guilt bubbling to the surface like a volcano trembling before eruption. They knew what they whispered behind closed doors. They knew the daggers they threw when they thought no one was looking. And as your life began to sing in a higher frequency, peace, purpose, progress, the resonance shook the fragile scaffolding of their lies. Isn't it sobering that every attempt they made to drown out your name only amplified their own corruption? Psalm 64:2 captures their schemes. Hide me from the conspiracy of the wicked, from the plots of evildoers. Yet what they could not see is that the very scaffolding they built against you became an echo chamber, amplifying not lies about you, but the trembling of their own conscience. They were haunted by the sound of their own guilt. Every warning they spread about you was a projection of the truth about themselves. When they accused you of manipulation, wasn't it because they were pulling the strings in secret? When they claimed you were unstable, wasn't it their house of cards that was trembling? Their accusations were smoke meant to obscure their own fire. They weren't protecting others from you. They were shielding themselves from the accountability they could not bear. Isn't that why the louder you lived in peace, the more desperate they became to paint you as dangerous? And in their desperation, their contradictions betrayed them. How could someone both be silent and manipulative, quiet and controlling, steady yet unstable? The weight of their lies collapsed under their own illogic. History gives us the same lesson. Emperor Tiberius of Rome, consumed by guilt for his cruelty, exiled himself to Capri, yet still filled his palaces with spies. Obsessed with enemies real and imagined, his paranoia became proof of his guilt. And after his death, his name was synonymous with tyranny. Doesn't it reveal that obsession is often panic in disguise? A signal flare that guilt can no longer be hidden, and just like Tiberius, your accusers became prisoners of the very fear they inflicted on others. Their paranoia locked them in chains far heavier than any accusation they hurled at you. They were building dungeons, but ended up caged inside them. Nature teaches this truth. The crow, when it cannot silence the eagle's flight, follows it with endless caws, hoping noise will disguise its own smallness. Your stability made their chaos unbearable. Your healing made their sickness visible. Your progress turned their sabotage into parody. Isn't it poetic that your very rise exposed their downfall? Not by force, but by contrast. And nature whispers a deeper law. No crow has ever grounded an eagle. Its noise may follow, but the eagle still soars higher than sound can chase. The very laws of creation sided with you, declaring that authenticity always ascends. You never sought revenge, yet they painted you as vindictive. You stayed quiet, yet they accused you of manipulating. You focused forward, yet they swore you were calculating. It was never about your actions, it was about their guilty conscience combusting in your presence. John 15:25 explains it simply. They hated me without a cause. And hatred without cause is always a symptom of guilt too heavy to hide. Isn't it staggering how your innocence became unbearable to them? How your peace revealed their restlessness? Your life was not their courtroom, yet they stood trial every time you walked into the room. Their judgment of you was their subconscious judgment of themselves. They were stuck in an endless loop, inventing stories, repeating lies, convincing themselves you were the threat, when all along their obsession was the evidence. Isn't it clear now that the way they couldn't stop talking about you was the loudest confession of all? Their hatred was camouflage, their fixation was panic, and their inability to leave you alone was the courtroom where they condemned themselves. Romans 2:1 makes it plain. You, therefore, have no excuse. You who pass judgment on someone else, for at whatever point you judge another, you are condemning yourself. Their words have become testimonies. Their lies have become sworn statements. And their very mouths have become the witness stand against their own souls. Rise, chosen one. Their obsession has already revealed the verdict. Their noise is proof of your innocence. Their fixation, the seal of your destiny. Walk forward, unshaken. For the more they talk, the more they testify against themselves. Their panic is prophecy, and your peace is victory. And in this holy paradox, your silence speaks louder than their shouting. Your composure outlasts their chaos, and your endurance crowns you with a triumph they can never erase. They wanted you erased not because you were guilty, but because your innocence was inconvenient. A mirror reflecting their corruption. Your innocence wasn't neutral, it was offensive. It was the sword of truth they could not blunt, the light they could not dim. Isn't it unsettling how purity itself can become a problem in a culture addicted to compromise? Isaiah 5:20 warns, "Woe unto them that call evil good, and good evil, that put darkness for light, and light for darkness." You became that light, and your very presence exposed what they wanted buried in the shadows. You didn't play their games. You refused to bend the truth just to be accepted. You wouldn't barter your integrity for approval or survival. And that made you untouchable to their systems of manipulation. They weren't searching for honesty, they were searching for control. And when they realized you could not be bought, bullied, or guilt-tripped into conformity, they panicked. Doesn't it echo the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Daniel 3:18, who told Nebuchadnezzar, "We will not serve thy gods." Integrity looks rebellious to the insecure because it resists the architecture of their lies. Your consistency became the earthquake that cracked their foundation. In spaces where backstabbing was the currency, your loyalty looked suspicious. Where fake smiles and hidden agendas were the norm, your transparency was interpreted as defiance. Isn't it twisted that in some circles being real is seen as rebellion? Yet Psalm 26:1 is clear, "Vindicate me, Lord, for I have led a blameless life. I have trusted in the Lord and have not faltered." Your honesty shook their ecosystem like resonance shaking the walls of a fragile structure, revealing how unstable their design truly was. You didn't need to expose anyone, your character was the exposure. Your presence was the spotlight that revealed cracks in their masks. And that's when the campaign began. They wanted you gone, not because you endangered them, but because you destabilized the illusions they lived on. Doesn't this mirror the story of Joseph in Genesis 39:12-20? Falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, not for wrongdoing, but for refusing corruption. Innocence is always inconvenient to those who thrive on manipulation. Instead of rising to your standard, they tried to erase it. You entered rooms and shifted atmospheres without speaking, and that terrified them. They knew that if you remained visible, the contrast between your authenticity and their hypocrisy would become undeniable. And contrast is the one thing liars cannot survive. Isn't it remarkable how truth needs no microphone? Its very frequency resonates louder than the noise of deception. History repeats this lesson through villains who waged war against innocence. Pontius Pilate, unable to find guilt in Jesus, declared, "I find no fault in this man," Luke 23:4, and yet still handed him over to appease the crowd. The result? Pilate's name became immortalized, not as a ruler, but as a coward. Isn't it proof that when innocence is condemned, the guilt of the accuser becomes eternal? In the same way, those who tried to cancel you only etched their own names into the record of shame. They spread stories, twisted motives, and orchestrated rejection, believing that if people despised you early, they'd never see you clearly. Yet what they underestimated is this: innocence requires no defense team, it defends itself. It may not shout, but it endures. Like granite shaped into a cathedral arch, your integrity outlasted their crumbling scaffolds of deceit. Isn't it ironic that the very purity they mocked has now become the standard by which others measure truth? Ordinary lives testify to this paradox. Carla, a grocery clerk in a small town, once told her co-worker, "They hate me because I refuse to gossip, but my silence is my shield." Years later, when rumors proved false, she became the one people trusted most. Doesn't her story show that innocence may be misunderstood in the moment, but it always earns respect in the end? They couldn't cleanse their hands, so they tried to stain yours. Yet every attempt failed, because consistency is the longest echo in the corridors of time. Innocence, though quiet, it is resilient. It survives storms, betrayal, even false crucifixion. And now, in a world addicted to manipulation, your authenticity is becoming the rare jewel people seek. Because real always outlasts fake, and light always conquers darkness. Rise, chosen one. Let your purity remain your protest. Your innocence remain your anthem. Do not shrink to fit their lies. Stand tall, for your very existence is proof that truth, though inconvenient, is indestructible. And when the dust clears, your innocence will not just survive, it will reign. They weren't simply trying to ruin your reputation, they were racing against time, clawing at the edges of destiny, desperate to bury you before the world could see the truth written into your soul. Their panic was never about your present, it was always about your future. Isn't it haunting how enemies often perceive your greatness before you do? Jeremiah 29:11 declares, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." They saw your evolution, the shift in your posture, the wisdom beginning to radiate, the strength becoming undeniable, and it terrified them, not because you were guilty of wrongdoing, but because your innocence was becoming proof that their lies were collapsing. They attacked early because they understood a dangerous truth. Once your light grew too bright, their shadows would vanish. Like Herod ordering the massacre of the innocents in Matthew 2:16, they sought to kill the truth in its infancy because they knew they couldn't silence it once it matured. Isn't that the mark of fear, that it moves faster than reason, louder than evidence, and always ahead of its time? They couldn't afford to let people hear your story for themselves. So they launched gossip like arrows into the air, hoping to poison every ear before your actions could speak louder than their accusations. Their campaign was not random, it was calculated sabotage. They saw that your presence was beginning to resonate like a tuning fork in a cathedral, setting the frequency of the entire atmosphere. And once others caught that vibration, their lies would no longer hold weight. Psalm 27:2 says, "When the wicked advance against me to devour me, it is my enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall." Isn't it striking that their urgency was not proof of your weakness, but of your unstoppable momentum? They weren't racing against you, they were racing against time, against the inevitability of your unveiling. And in their desperation, they recruited others, exaggerated every detail, and spun every story with theatrical drama. The irony is clear: the louder they screamed, the more fragile their position became. Just as in Shakespeare's Macbeth, where Lady Macbeth cries, "Out, damned spot." Her obsession with washing her hands revealed her guilt more than her innocence. Their hysteria betrayed them. Isn't it poetic that lies always require volume? While truth stands calm in silence, they built an echo chamber. But echoes cannot create substance, they only repeat emptiness. History offers the same verdict. Caiaphas, the high priest, feared that Jesus' growing influence would expose their religious hypocrisy. So he declared in John 11:50, "It is better that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish." Yet by trying to destroy him early, they only fulfilled the prophecy of salvation. Doesn't this show that attacks launched in panic often accelerate the very destiny they were designed to prevent? Nature whispers the same law. Poison ivy spreads quickly across the ground, choking young plants, but it cannot stop an oak from growing once its roots take hold. In the same way, their gossip raced ahead of you like weeds. But your truth was the tree destined to tower above their noise. Isn't it remarkable that panic moves fast, but purpose always grows deep? And now, time has delivered its quiet verdict. Your character has been doing the patient work, brick upon brick, foundation upon foundation, while their noise collapses under its own contradictions. Proverbs 12:20 promises. Truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue lasts only a moment. Isn't it revealing that those who shouted the loudest now tremble under their own echoes? While your steady silence has become a sanctuary of credibility, their panic hasn't stopped. If anything, it has intensified, because the unveiling they feared is unfolding before their eyes. Despite every scheme, despite every rumor, despite every attempt to bury you, your truth is still spreading, still shining, still cutting through their noise like light splitting the darkness. And what they feared most, exposure, is no longer a threat on the horizon, it is their present reality. Romans 8:31 thunders, "If God is for us, who can be against us?" Their panic was a prophecy, and your endurance is the proof. Rise, chosen one, do not fear their noise, for it is the sound of a crumbling empire. Stand tall, for your consistency has already dismantled their lies. Walk forward, because your future is no longer waiting to be revealed, it is here. And no scheme of man can outrun the plans of God. You were a threat without even trying, and that was the part that terrified them most. You weren't competing with them, yet they were secretly competing with you. You weren't chasing clout, validation, or begging for a seat at their fragile table of politics. Yet your presence exposed their desperation to prove themselves. Isn't it strange how not striving can be more threatening than striving itself? Proverbs 17:27 reminds us, "The one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and whoever has understanding is even-tempered." Your restraint unsettled them because it spoke of a mastery they had never achieved. They thrived on control. But how do you control someone who doesn't need your approval to breathe? They studied you like an unsolvable equation, and your refusal to play their game disarmed every tactic. While they crafted strategies to be seen, you simply lived in solidity. Isn't it haunting that authenticity feels like rebellion in a world built on performance? Daniel 6:4 records that Daniel's enemies could find no corruption in him, because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. That same spirit of integrity turned you into their nightmare. You weren't acting, you were being. And what you were being: whole, grounded, authentic, exposed their hollowness. Your very existence revealed the emptiness of their power structures. You didn't manipulate for attention, didn't lie for influence, didn't trample others to rise. Instead, you evolved like a tree growing quietly but unshakably, its roots deepening even when no one was watching. Isn't it powerful that peace can be more disruptive than conflict? Isaiah 26:3 promises, "You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast, because they trust in you." Your calm became a sanctuary that revealed their chaos, and your silence weighed heavier than their loudest schemes. They couldn't handle it because everything they built rested on appearances, on noise, on scaffolds of control that rattled under the weight of your presence. Your confidence uncovered their insecurity. Your calm dismantled their frenzy. Your silence echoed louder than their gossip. And that imbalance made them feel powerless. Isn't it ironic that their loud accusations crumbled before your quiet truth? Just as Jesus stood silent before Pilate in Matthew 27-14, your refusal to be baited made them rage even more. Because silence always unnerves the guilty. And history has shown us how the insecure react to unshakable truth. King Saul, eaten alive by jealousy, hurled spears at David, not because David attacked him, but because David's mere presence carried favor he could not replicate. His obsession drove him into ruin, proving that envy always consumes the envious before the envied. Doesn't this reveal that what they feared in you was never your attack, but your existence? Nature testifies. The shadow of a mountain does not move the mountain, but its stillness commands respect. The river does not compete with the desert, yet its flow exposes the barrenness of the sand. Isn't it remarkable that by simply being steady, you revealed the futility of their noise? In the physics of spirit, presence carries more resonance than performance, and you became the resonant note that shattered their illusions. They whispered behind your back, sowed seeds of doubt, turned others against you before your light could reach them. Their goal was to bury you in silence, to erase you before presence could testify louder than their propaganda. But John 1:5 declares, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." Here you are, still present, still powerful, still rising into everything they feared. And the longer you endure, the more their illusions collapse in the light of your authenticity. The truth is, they were never afraid of what you did. They were afraid of what you didn't need to do. You didn't have to perform, manipulate, or beg to embody the very thing they wished they were. Isn't it staggering that your refusal to play the game exposed the emptiness of everyone who played it? Your being was the evidence, and your existence is the verdict. Rise, chosen one. Do not shrink for the comfort of the insecure. Stand boldly in the quiet authority of authenticity, for your presence has already undone their illusions. Your peace has already dismantled their weapons, and your endurance has already proven you are everything they feared and everything heaven designed you to be. The smear campaign was not just their weapon, it was their confession in disguise. Every rumor, every whispered accusation, every exaggerated story they crafted was less about destroying you and more about betraying themselves. Isn't it haunting that lies always leave a trail of truth behind them, like smoke revealing where the fire is? Proverbs 12:19 declares, "Truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue lasts only a moment." They thought they were hiding their guilt, but every word they spoke became a breadcrumb, pointing directly back to the secrets they swore no one would uncover. It was never just an attack, it was a psychological projection. A case study in guilt made visible. When people lie boldly, consistently, and without provocation, what does that reveal except the burden of something they are desperate to bury? Jeremiah 17:9 warns, "The heart is deceitful above all things, and desperately wicked. Who can know it? You weren't the threat, you were the mirror, and your very presence, even in silence, made them unravel because it exposed the vast chasm between who they pretended to be and who they truly were." Isn't that why their rage felt so personal, so theatrical? It was never about your words, it was about your witness. They flipped the script, converting their own guilt into accusations, making you the scapegoat, just like in Leviticus 16:21-22, where the sins of the people were symbolically placed on a goat and driven into the wilderness. They tried to drive you out with the weight of their own shame. But lies built from fear always betray themselves. They sound too detailed, too emotional, too desperate. Isn't it fascinating that the more they accuse you, the more they expose themselves? Their stories grew elaborate, yet the evidence never appeared. Their claims became dramatic, yet your life never matched the energy of their fables. Over time, the contradictions became impossible to ignore. People began whispering new questions. If this person is really that bad, why are they still standing? Why does their peace not match the portrait of chaos we were told? Why does it seem the accusers are the ones unraveling? Ecclesiastes 7:29 says, "God created mankind upright, but they have gone in search of many schemes." Isn't it revealing that in their schemes, they condemned themselves while your stability remained untouched? Their smear campaign backfired because projection cannot withstand consistency. It always folds beneath the steady weight of truth. History offers witnesses of this dynamic. During the Salem witch trials, neighbors hurled accusations to protect their reputations. But as the frenzy spread, the lies devoured the very people who birthed them. Isn't it chilling that hysteria always eats its own children? The loudest voices became the most discredited, and the echo of their lies became the record of their guilt. And even nature testifies. When a raven tries to mimic the song of the nightingale, the cracks in its voice eventually expose it. Noise may imitate melody for a moment, but resonance cannot be faked. Isn't it powerful that your calm, silent, steady, consistent, grounded has spoken more convincingly than their orchestra of chaos? Isaiah 54:17 promises, "No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment thou shalt condemn. The very tongues that sought to bury you are now betraying their own corruption. You didn't need a PR team. You didn't have to clap back, like an architect laying stones for a cathedral. You simply kept showing up, one brick of consistency after another, until your character towered over the ruins of their narratives. And just like a symphony's quiet adagio before the thunder of its crescendo, your restraint built tension until truth itself roared louder than every smear. Isn't it poetic that the lies which once echoed like trumpets now sound like hollow tin against the resonance of your life? Ordinary voices confirm this. Marcus, a bus driver from Chicago, once said after being falsely accused by a co-worker, "I just kept driving my route. After a while, people saw the truth for themselves, and the lies collapsed." Isn't his story proof that real integrity doesn't need to shout, it simply outlasts the noise? And now the mask is slipping. The people who screamed the loudest are being exposed, their projections crumbling, their secrets unraveling. Their smear campaign was never your trial, it was their confession. And your endurance has become the verdict. Innocence sustained, truth revealed, lies dismantled. Rise, chosen one. Do not shrink in the face of slander. Stand firm, for every false word against you has already turned into evidence of their guilt. Your silence is no longer silent, it is resonance, reverberating across time as testimony that the truth will always stand, and you will stand with it. They didn't come armed with evidence, they came armed with agreement. Agreement is a weak substitute for truth, but it feels powerful in the hands of the bitter. They didn't arrive with proof. They arrived with people who already presented your light. Not because of any crime you committed, but because your presence reminded them of what they had failed to become. Isn't it chilling how insecurity can recruit a crowd faster than truth can? Proverbs 18:8 says, "The words of a gossip are like choice morsels. They go down to the smallest parts. Their words spread like wildfire, not because they were true, but because they tasted like comfort to those who were starving for validation." It was never about the truth. It was always about numbers. They weren't building a case, they were constructing a mob. A noisy, bitter chorus that echoed each other's hate as if it were gospel. Does this not sound like the crowd in Matthew 27-22, when Pilate asked, "What shall I do?" Then, with Jesus who is called the Messiah, and they shouted back, "Crucify him," without evidence, without reason. Only agreement? Your accusers didn't need justice, they needed company in their misery. They linked arms with others who resented your peace, your discipline, your favor, until resentment became their religion. Their common ground wasn't truth, but frustration. They couldn't figure you out, couldn't shake you, couldn't dim the shine that came without effort. So they turned their envy into a movement, not fueled by reason, but by resentment. Isn't it striking that even nature reveals this pattern? Wolves howl together in the dark, not because the moon threatens them, but because the light reminds them they are small. In the same way, their collective noise was an admission of your unshakable glow. Accusations 4:4 tells us, "I saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, chasing after the wind." Woos. They weren't chasing clarity, they were chasing comfort. Comfort for a guilty conscience comes in the form of agreement, even if the agreement is built on lies. They gathered in gossip circles, cliques, and group chats full of people who already despised your light. Isn't it revealing that they never examined your life? They only judged you through the lens of their own insecurity. They didn't discuss events, they exaggerated them, stretching shadows into monsters. And instead of holding one another accountable, they clapped, nodded, and passed the microphone of slander to the next willing mouth. History reminds us of the danger of such mobs. During the French Revolution, Maximilien Robespierre rallied crowds with fiery rhetoric, condemning others without trial. Yet soon the same crowds turned against him, and he was executed by the very guillotine he had sharpened for others. Doesn't this prove that crowds built on resentment eventually consume their own leaders? Agreement may sound like authority, but without truth, it is only noise awaiting collapse. It wasn't a trial, it was a parade of misery masquerading as justice. But while they marched, chanting their false anthems, they forgot one immutable law: agreement does not equal truth. John 8:32 declares, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." You didn't waste your energy fighting them. You didn't scramble to defend yourself with equal noise. You simply stayed planted, rooted like a tree by living water, letting your consistency speak louder than their accusations. Isn't it powerful that your silence carried more resonance than their orchestra of chaos? Over time, the dust began to clear, and people noticed the gaping difference between what was said about you and who you truly are. Their alliances, once loud and proud, began to fracture in the silence of reality. For once the drama died down, the emotions faded, and the adrenaline of slander wore off. All that remained was reality, and reality pointed back to you, still standing. Isn't it ironic that what they designed as a spiritual ambush only exposed them as insecure architects of their own downfall? Now, the very people they rallied are beginning to back away, realizing they were nothing more than foot soldiers in a battle fueled not by justice, but by jealousy. Psalm 37:12-13 declares, "The wicked plot against the righteous and gnash their teeth at them, but the Lord laughs at the wicked. For he knows their day is coming. Their day is here." The smear campaign was never your destruction, it was their confession. Rise, chosen one. Stand tall in the midst of the ruins of their parade. For while their noise fades, your endurance sings. Agreement was their counterfeit crown, but the truth remains your covering. And no crowd, no mob, no alliance of resentment can erase what God has placed upon you. They fought dirty precisely because you shined clean. From the very beginning, they knew they could never beat you in the realm of character, consistency, or divine purpose. So they crawled into the shadows of underhanded tactics. Isn't it telling that when people cannot rise to your standard, their only option is to drag you toward the mud? Psalm 35:7 says, "Since they hid their net for me without cause and without reason, dug a pit for me, may ruin overtake them by surprise. They spread lies in whispers, set traps in your path, and tried to isolate you from those who truly cared. They twisted your words, distorted your intentions, and smeared your name, not because you were guilty, but because your purity revealed their filth. They couldn't compete with how naturally you carried what they had to counterfeit. That authenticity was your armor, and their envy became their poison. Isn't it haunting how truth unsettles those who only know performance? In Daniel 6-4, Daniel's enemies searched for grounds of accusation, but could find no corruption in him, because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Like Daniel, your life itself became the evidence of their corruption. Their only hope was to bait you into descending to their level. They longed to provoke you, to see you defend yourself in ways that made you look as messy as their lies. But you refused the bait. You walked away from the board while they were still calculating their next chess move. Isn't it powerful that walking away can sometimes be the most disruptive response? You knew who you were. You discerned what they were doing. And instead of revenge, you chose elevation. Romans 12:21 reminds us, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Every time you declined to fight dirty, you dismantled their strategy, because their entire framework relied on one thing, your reaction. And when no reaction came, their own noise collapsed inward. They launched smear campaigns like arrows, but your silence became a shield. They stirred chaos, but your composure turned into a mirror that exposed their frenzy. Isn't it remarkable that chaos cannot compete with evolution? While they exhausted themselves in bitterness, you were healing, learning, glowing, ascending, like gold refined in fire. Your spirit became purer each time they tried to scorch it. Isaiah 48:6 says, see, I have refined you, though not as silver. I have tested you in the furnace of affliction. Your endurance became your testimony, and their dirt only polished your shine. History bears witness. Richard III, England's most infamous usurper, fought dirty with deceit and bloodshed to secure his crown. Yet his name is remembered not for glory but for infamy, immortalized in Shakespeare's tragedy as a man devoured by his own schemes. Isn't it poetic that villains who fight in shadows are always exposed by the light of time? Your enemies, like Richard, will discover that their attempts to stain you only etched their own downfall into the record. Nature tells the same truth. A muddy river may churn with noise and froth, but the mountain spring runs clear, steady, and untouched. Isn't it striking that the calm waters nourish life, while the murky ones poison it? In the physics of spirit, resonance always amplifies what is pure, while distortion collapses under its own static. Your clarity resonated, their lies were static. And when the static faded, your steady frequency still hummed strong. Ordinary voices confirm this reality. Rosa, a seamstress from Lisbon, once said, after being slandered by co-workers, I kept sewing. I kept bringing beauty into the world. And when the gossip stopped echoing, my work was still here. Isn't that the very essence of your journey? You kept creating, building, growing, while their accusations dissolved like dust in the wind. You let your actions speak. You kept your hands clean, your energy steady, your focus forward. And while they threw stones in the dark, you were building cathedrals of resilience. 2 Corinthians 4:10-7 reminds us, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Their chaos could not compete with your evolution, because evolution always outruns envy. Rise, chosen one, refuse their mud, for your light was never meant to be dimmed. Keep shining, keep standing, keep walking forward, for your refusal to fight dirty has already proven your victory. And the same grace that lifted you above their schemes will keep elevating you until even your enemies confess that your shine was heaven's design. Your glow came from the very fire they tried to consume you with, and your strength was forged in the storms they swore would break you. Isn't it strange how the same flames meant to destroy can become the forge of resilience? Malachi 3:3 says, "He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver." Every lie, every betrayal, every attempt to burn you down became the heat that revealed gold. You emerged without bitterness, without scandal, without stooping to expose them. And that silence, that maturity, that unshakable glow, they cannot stand it, because it proves every accusation they launched was projection, not reality. Now they are unraveling, not because you fought them, but because their entire identity was constructed like scaffolding around the idea of your downfall. And scaffolding collapses when the cathedral it leans on refuses to fall. Isn't it powerful that you didn't even have to lift a finger to win? Isaiah 54:17 promises, "No weapon forged against you will prevail, and you will refute every tongue that accuses you." You were the storm they couldn't predict, the light they couldn't dim, the silence they couldn't silence. They fought dirty because they had no other option left. And that desperation is devouring them from the inside. It kills them slowly that you didn't match their venom. You stayed clean while they smeared themselves in the mud. Isn't it ironic that by refusing to fight dirty, you landed the final blow? They built lies like fortress walls, gathered haters like soldiers, and launched gossip like poisoned arrows. Yet here you are, unbothered, elevated, untouchable. Psalm 23:5 declares, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." Your glow became their courtroom, and your consistency became their undoing. You never had to manipulate, beg, or scream to prove your innocence. You simply kept showing up with truth in your eyes, strength in your spirit, and purpose in your steps. Isn't it haunting how consistency dismantles chaos without even raising its voice? Their noise scattered like static, but your resonance rang like a tuning fork that steadied the entire room. While they relied on groupthink, you relied on divine alignment. While they spread chaos, you embodied peace. Philippians 4:7 says, "And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." That it was truthing that the rust to the never term. History bears witness. Richard Nixon, once powerful, collapsed under the weight of Watergate, not because others shouted louder, but because the quiet truth eventually pierced through his fortress of denial. Isn't it sobering that the mighty often fall, not from the force of their enemies, but from the weight of their own lies? Your enemies, too, are realizing their collapse was always self-inflicted. Nature tells the same story. The lotus flower rises untainted from the filthiest waters. Untouched by the mud it grows through. Isn't it remarkable that purity shines brightest in polluted places, like that lotus? You grew clean in a dirty world, untouched by the swamp of their schemes. Your peace became your protest. Your growth became your verdict. And even ordinary voices echo this truth. Maria, a nurse from Madrid, once said, after being slandered by co-workers, "I didn't argue. I just kept caring for my patients." Years later, those patients defended me louder than I ever could. Isn't her story the perfect mirror of yours? Your life has become your loudest testimony. Now the dust has cleared, and those who once whispered behind your back are questioning everything they were told. What they labeled weakness was resilience. What they called proof was projection. What they tried to cancel was something heaven had already confirmed. John 15:25 reminds us, "They hated me without a cause." Their hatred was never your fault, it was their reflection. And when people can't handle their own reflection, they try to shatter the glass, but broken glass cuts back. Let them bleed on the shards of their own hands. You keep evolving, keep rising, keep glowing clean in a dirty world, because now the truth roars louder than the lies, and your victory is echoing like a symphony, drowning out their smear campaign forever. Rise, chosen one, for your glow is not just survival, it is prophecy fulfilled. Beloved chosen ones, the truth has been laid bare. They went to unthinkable lengths to destroy you, weaving lies, staging attacks, and orchestrating chaos. Yet every scheme only revealed how undeniable your calling truly is. What was meant to bury you became the soil that grew your strength. What was designed to silence you became the stage for your voice. And what they tried to weaponize against you has now become their own confession. Proof that God's covering over your life cannot be undone. Remember the words of Genesis 50:20. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done. The saving of many lives. That is your story. You were never defeated. You were refined. If this message has pierced your spirit, don't just scroll away. Join this movement of truth and light. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another word that speaks directly to your soul. Like this video so it reaches someone else who is silently enduring false accusations or spiritual warfare. Drop a comment and share how this resonates with your journey. We read every word. And your testimony might be the spark that strengthens someone else's faith. And if you've supported through super thanks, or even if all you could give was your time and presence here, know this: I thank you deeply from my heart. This community is built not on performance, but on shared resilience, truth, and divine elevation. We are not just spectators of life, we are builders of legacy, carriers of light, chosen by heaven for such a time as this. Each video, each word, is not just motivation, it is confirmation. It is a trumpet of awakening, a call to rise higher than the lies, stronger than the attacks, and bolder than the fear. So don't just stand on the sidelines. Hit that bell, share this message, and step into the proof of your calling. May blessings chase you down. May peace surround your home. And may your glow remain untouched by the dirt of this world. Keep rising, keep glowing, and keep walking in the undeniable truth. You are chosen, you are covered, and your victory is already written.